Welcome back to Case Studies with Caleb. We are here for our second lab review for the JMK series. If you didn't watch the first one, I would recommend you go back and do that so you're up to date with all the things that we're trying to do. All right, so she stopped the oral contraception in early June. And so what we're seeing today, or at least today on 7/1, is 1 month after she stopped. So when we look at all our hormones, we're going to try and figure out what part of her cycle she was in. But it's important to know that on a couple days after stopping the birth control, that she had a period, and that period lasted for a week. She said the first couple of days were really heavy, but after that it was normal. Now, bleeding for a week is not normal. It should only last for 3 to 4 days. So let's see. What else should we chat about before? Let's see. So what was our plan? Oh, okay, so she did eliminate gluten and dairy, and a lot of her gastrointestinal complaints went away. Still has really bad reflux, so she still takes the PPI, but a lot of her fatigue and just kind of general aches and pains are gone. She also had skin rashes that she didn't tell me about that didn't, register to talk about, and she doesn't have those anymore either. So all good things, all good things. Number 2, the digestive enzymes did help, she said, with, subjectively, you can't really tell a difference if your other complaints have gotten significantly better after eliminating gluten and dairy. So we don't know if it's the digestive enzymes or not, but it didn't make the reflux worse, which is good. Now, the multivitamin, she started, but she didn't refill it. So it only lasted for a month. And then when we look at the labs today, we're going to see a couple odd things that I wouldn't have expected. So we'll talk about that later. And then we already talked about her stopping the oral contraceptive. So let's go back to our labs. Now, her DHEA wasn't a problem before, still good. Her estradiol came up. Now, up is relative, but 70 is decent. It's not bad. Her gonadotropin made a full recovery, right? So they were at, less than 1 on the oral contraceptive, and they've completely rebounded. Now, it's also important to note that these aren't just elevated for no reason. They elevate mid-cycle and stay elevated for a little bit longer to induce ovulation. So it definitely looks like she ovulated this cycle because gonadotropins were high. Progesterone is also elevated, so she did have a corpus luteum. Estrogen is not as high as I would expect for right after ovulation, where it would be a little bit higher, but maybe it's on the tail end of the distribution where it's starting to allow for the period to happen. Thyroid still checks out okay. The TSH is getting a little bit elevated, but I'm still okay with a 3. Eventually, we might do something, but 1 measurement isn't enough for me to throw around thyroid hormones when we haven't even done sex hormones yet. Now, the last lab report didn't have lipids. And we can see here that her lipid analysis actually is quite relevant. So she's got high cholesterol. She's got high triglycerides. Now, I'm not on first principles worried about this just yet, but we'll get to the particle number in just a little bit, and that does justify the concern, especially with the elevated oxidized LDL and homocysteine. So more on that later. CMP is still okay. So now when we get down here to this CBC, we get all kinds of funky information. So first of all, we have a high hematocrit and a normal hemoglobin. So to me, this is just a little bit of a dehydration picture, right? It's not the 3-to-1 where you would consider that hematocrit is secondary to polycythemia. In addition, her red blood cells are normal. Now, we went from, I think it was 89 last time, to 99 for this MCV. And that's after starting a liposomal multivitamin that should have good absorption, has methyl and hydroxycobalamin for B12 sources, and methylfolate for a folate source. So it was interesting to see this precipitous incline in MCV, but who knows what's going on. We can just take a best guess and say it could be the withdrawal of wheat sources, which are heavily fortified in vitamins and minerals and all sorts of things. So if she's not adequately replacing the nutrition from that regard, we could see a micronutrient deficiency there. So that could play a role, but we are unsure at this point. Now, on the other hand, we have this elevated distribution width. So there is some discordance between the smallest and largest red blood cells, which means she's making either really large ones, which is obviously the case here, and they're not mature. One of the next tests that should be run after this is a EPO level to see the level of erythropoiesis, but I don't think we ran that. Getting down to iron, so last time her iron was fine in the mid-hundreds. So now we're getting a picture, and she did bleed for 7 days, so we have to take that into account. But we get a picture of, I would say, still relatively optimal, but the response down here is indicating that the body is actually craving more iron, right? So the saturation is very low, the total iron binding capacity is high, indicating that there's more transferrin that is not bound to iron. So it could, who knows if there's a binding affinity problem with the iron and transferrin. From a serological value, purely ferritin and iron are fine. But with celiac disease, even though I'm not saying she has that, she has the tissue transglutaminase antibodies. Typically, if you see that kind of damage happening to the villi, you get a weird picture with iron absorption and nutrient assimilation. The interesting thing is we didn't see that on the last set of labs, and in between then and now, we've actually cut out the instigating trigger. So we'll see if it clears up. Getting down to testosterone, this is not a terrible number, but again, she's not at that 1 to 2%. Sex hormone binding globulin did decrease though, but it also decreased with total testosterone, because total testosterone was 70 something last review. So now we've got a picture that could be helped with a little bit of testosterone supplementation. Now let's dig on into the lipids. 2,420 nanomoles per liter LDL particle number, with a good portion of that being small and medium. This should not say LDL large, that's HDL large. Our lab's kind of dumb. But regardless, we need to address that bad boy. And if you want a breakdown, I did one for one of the others, yeah, I think it was the JCB case study, where we kind of took apart the LDL cholesterol into the different particle fractionation and what that meant as far as risk for atherosclerotic disease. But you guys can go back and check that out. I'm not going to revisit it here. Estrone is pretty much 1-to-1 with estradiol now. It was 70, so we're looking at a 1-to-1 metabolism picture. We want that at 2-to-1 estradiol to estrone. So we'll consider supplementing with estradiol as well, because whenever you go 30 years without a period, you tend to like not having a period. So we're going to try to make a situation where she has a bioidentical hormone replacement therapy that also serves as birth control. But instead of suppressing the gonadotropins, we're basically going to do the opposite and try and increase progesterone and estradiol to mimic a pregnancy type situation where it feeds back into the pituitary and says, hey, we don't need to ovulate because we already have enough of these hormones because we're pregnant. But she won't be. That's just the clinical goal, is to mimic a state of pseudo-pregnancy so that ovulation is actually inhibited. So let's just review real quick. I think we made it through. Okay, so let's go over to our secondary plan. So we're going to stay with everything we did the first one in the first plan, which is still, eliminating gluten and dairy, still taking the digestive enzymes with meals, sticking with the multivitamin, and now that we've stopped the OCP, we're going to start hormone replacement. So first and foremost, the cardiovascular risk was pretty significant, long term. So we're going to address that. I offer her both pharmacological and nutraceutical options to intervene. She wanted to do a mix of both. So we started rosuvastatin, we started some bergamot, omega-3 fatty acids to try and tackle that picture. So we'll see how successful we were with those interventions next time. But for now, that's what we did. At this visit, we were going to try and taper off of the PPI, because part of my intuition was thinking that maybe the assimilation problem with her nutrients was happening because of the PPI. So it was a goal of hers anyway, so I figured let's go ahead and start. So what we did was a gradual 1-month taper with oral BPC 157, body protection compound peptide, as well as some melatonin, which helps keep the pyloric sphincter tone high to prevent regurgitation. For hormone replacement, we're going to do a estradiol, testosterone, DHEA, and progesterone vaginal tablet. So replacing all those things and then supporting the DHEA alongside. And then last but not least, to help with estrogen metabolism, we threw in some diindolylmethane. Now, there are plenty of other things that we could have added to this picture, but one of my personal restrictions is not throwing the kitchen sink at people. Just because there is an indication for something doesn't mean to do it. So I like to do get the most bang for the buck with supplement and pharmaceutical choices. So this is what we're going to do for now. We're going to let it roll and see how everything goes. And then we'll get into our tertiary plan after we review the next set of labs. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe and comment if you have any insights to pass along. But otherwise, we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in.